Our lesson is found this morning from the book of Genesis, the first two verses, and a selection from Audra's African Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Never to be forgotten, to be derided, is the inconspicuous figure in the quiet back room of civilization. He sits with head bent, silent, waiting, listening to the commotion in the streets. He is the keeper of the kinds. Who is he? We do not know. But his presence is evident in the last reaches of infinite space, beyond man's probing eye. His presence is guessable in the last reaches of infinite smallness, beyond the magnification of electron or microscope. He is present in all living beings and in all inanimate matter. His presence is asserted in all things that ever were and in all things that will ever be. And as his command is unanswerable, his identity is unknowable. But his most ancient concern is with order. You may sense his presence in the kind of matter called helium, that it has always and will forever behave according to the rules and regulations of helium. You may sense his word in the second law of thermodynamics, or the patterned behavior of brook trout in a clear New Zealand pool. You may find his word in the forms of cities and symphonies, of Rembrandts and fir trees and cumulus clouds. You may read his command in the regularity of turning things, in stars and seasons, in tides and in striking clocks. Where bursts the green of the apple orchard all of a springtime day, there passes his presence. And here too he passes in the windy fluttering of scarlet leaves and the calls of the harvester. Where a child is born, or a man lies dead, where life must go on though tragedy deny it, where a farmer replants fields again despoiled by flood or drought, where men rebuild cities that other men destroy, where tides must ebb as tides have flowed, there see his footprints, there and there. He cares only for order, and whatever he says, we shall do. He is rising now in civilization's quiet back room, and he's looking out of the window. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Before I begin our thinking together on the experience of community, on behalf of Mrs. Thurman and myself, I wish to express our appreciation for all of the courtesies and little and simple expressions of spontaneous grace by which you have surrounded our days here. We have been reading the community news for a long time, but now when it comes to us in San Francisco, we'll read it with the freshness that was not a part of our experience before. As an immediate background for our thought, will you listen to these words? I like to feel strange life beating up against my life. I like to realize forms of life utterly unlike my own. When my own life feels small and I'm oppressed with it, I like to crush together and see it in a picture, in an instant, a multitude of disconnected, unlike phases of human life. A medieval monk with his string of beads pacing the quiet orchard and looking up from the grass at his feet to the heavy fruit trees. Little Malay boys playing naked on a shining sea beach. A Hindu philosopher alone under his banyan tree, thinking, so that in the thought of God he may lose himself. A troop of bacchanalians dressed in white with crowns of vine leaves dancing along the Roman streets. A martyr on the night of his death looking through the narrow window to the sky and feeling that already he has the wings that shall bear him up. An Epicurean discoursing at a Roman bath to a knot of his disciples on the nature of happiness. A Kafir witch doctor seeking for herbs by moonlight, while from the huts on the hillside come the sound of dogs barking and the voices of women and children. A mother giving bread and milk to her children in little wooden basins and singing the evening song. I like to see it all. I feel it run through me, that life belongs to me. It makes my little life larger. It breaks down the narrow walls that shut me in. The experience of community is a part of the givenness of life. To put before you rather clearly what is at work in my mind, let us think for a moment about the two different dimensions that are present or apparent in our use of the term life. There is life that is contrasted with death, that has a beginning and an ending, that is held in a tight circle representing a limited time interval in which one lives, is born, lives, dies. Life in that sense. And then there is life that contains both life and death. life as a vast creative continuum with reference to which we cannot think either of beginning or ending. We can think of beginnings and endings, perhaps, but all as a little time interval affecting a particular expression of life. It is for this reason, then, that we are profoundly convinced that life itself is alive. Now, of course, you know that you are alive, and the person next to you may be alive. And the mind is so overwhelmed by the mass attack of all of these particular expressions of aliveness that the most profound and essentially simple and significant aspect of life is overlooked, and that is that life itself is alive. And it is this ground of aliveness, this basic undercurrent of respiration that sustains all particular expressions of life. And this becomes very significant in contemplating the meaning of death. For it becomes very, very clear as we think of life and death in this dimension that death is always thought of in terms of the life and death cycle as something that happens in life, not something that happens to life. And all religions have seized upon this basic insight and addressed themselves to some dimension of meaning about the significance of the little time interval in which you live and I live that transcends that time interval. Now, the experience of community is the gross experience of the unity of life. It is the gross experience that binds all life together, that signifies and underscores the oneness of life. Now, when this ground experience of community becomes a part of the deliberate intent, self-conscious intent of the individual, then at the level of self-awareness, we become conscious of the underbinding unity that holds all of life together. It is for this reason that we are very conscious of the walls that separate one form of life from another. And there's always a feeling, almost a rumor in the mind, that if you work at it, you can bypass the thing that separates one form of life from another. Those of you who are interested in this and perhaps have been reading about it may recall the experiments that are being done in your own city, in New York City, with reference to the effect of the emotions, dare I say this, the effect of the emotions that go on in plants on the emotions that go on inside of you. It makes life sort of weird that the plant knows when I'm approaching it with the scissors, and it says something to me about what I'm doing, and perhaps the pain that it feels is reflected in some stirring in my own emotions. I don't know, but think about it. Look into it. I don't have time to move in that direction at the moment. The experience of community is given. This is the point that I'm making. It is a part of the can't-help-itness of life. It is basic. We are rooted in it. It is the thing that makes all life one. Now, when with my mind I formalize this experience and make it an act of volition and intent, it is then that the resources in which I am rooted as a living being become available to me at the level of the kind of lifestyle, the kind of world that I am hoping to experience in consciousness and as a part of the ordering of society. It is for this reason that the dreams that men have when they are at their best, the dreams that they have about the way life ought to be, if they had the power to shape it, to order it, to tailor-make it. Always these dreams that we call utopias are grounded and rooted in a sense of harmony, in which consciously now the relationship between expressions of life, human beings, we experience at that level of awareness what is a part of the givenness that sustains us as living creatures. So, the prophet Isaiah talks of the time when the lion and the lamb will lie down together, when a little child will put his hand over the hole of an asp, and the asp will relax his self-regarding impulse and not sting the child. Because, as the prophet puts it, the knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. The experience of community at the deepest level will rise up and invade the conscious activities of human beings. This is what he's saying. And the same is reflected in the past, the racial memory, the stories of creation. All of them say this from whatever culture, whatever style of life, however simple or sophisticated, but men begin to dream about how did the world get started. Always they come upon the same basic insight. There was a time when harmony, order, this was the givenness of creation. And then, of course, a divisive principle entered and all kinds of things happened. When I was a boy, I visited one of my friends across the woods. And when I went around the house into the backyard, I heard someone rapping on the window, and it was his father telling me to come around and come through the front door. And I did, and when I went into the room where he was, he pointed out into the backyard, and there, my friend's baby sister, and of course this man's daughter, was sitting in the yard of baby, about 2, 6, 8, 9 months, anyway, a crawling creature, sitting down in the sand playing with this rattlesnake. Now they were having a wonderful experience, The rattlesnake would crawl away. She'd pull him back by his tail. She'd turn him over on his back. I mean, and they were flowing together. And my friend was stationed on one side and I was stationed on the other. Why? So that no one would come around and do what? Introduce into this harmony, in which, you see, at the level of intent, the ground of oneness was lifted and was being experienced. This would be disrupted by there being introduced an invasive or divisive principle. There would be fear and anxiety and death and violence, breaking the harmony. It is for this reason, then, that when we think of the deliberate and self-conscious relationships between human beings, we cannot think creatively about it, it seems to me, and cannot enter into it creatively unless we are aware of the common ground of experienced community which is synonymous with being alive. Thus then, hate becomes an act on the part of an individual when he wills the non-existence of a human being. When he intends his non-existence, how to say this, he sees him as if he were not. It is for this reason, I think, that in times of war, one of the first things that a society does is first to set up the enemy category, which puts the enemy somewhat out of bounds, and then to redefine the enemy so that the enemy is no longer what? A member of the human race. Now, as soon as that happens, the ground is prepared for his non-existence. So whatever tie, whatever ethical tie, whatever sense of reverence or regard that I might have for him as a human being is wiped out because his existence does not exist in my mind. And if I cannot recognize that he is there, then he is no longer binding upon me. Now love means the same thing in another very creative dimension, or perhaps difference. For you see, if hate means, in the light of this thesis, if hate means the will of another person's non-existence, if I may tie the words up that way, then love means to let the experience of community in me become one with the community of experience in him. And it is for this reason then that the beach head that love always establishes in another human being consistently is at a point in that other human being that is beyond all of his faults and all of his virtues. It is to get on the other side of the frontier and standing there to look back across the frontier at your life and the other person's life. It is for this reason, for instance, that forgiveness is so hard in any of the categories of any religion, because I cannot forgive if I have not been able to go past the frontier that separates, that provides the context, dividing this life from my life. But once I make it, then there is this flow. And it cannot be done without the active work of the imagination. And I think this is where self-consciousness, where the existence or the coming into being of the mind in man works creatively. Very often it works just the other way around, but it works creatively in this regard because the imagination enables you to do this. And without imagination, you can't. The phrase is, without imagination, you cannot see God. Without imagination, you cannot see man. To give you a feeling of what I'm thinking, I visited with a friend of mine once, and he had a little boy who was just learning how to ride his kiddie cart. And he drove his kiddie cart into the living room where I was reading the morning's paper. And he stopped his kiddie cart at my feet, and he said, "Mr. Thurman, will you please help me change my tire? I just had a blowout." So I put the newspaper down. I helped him jack up his car, and we took the old shoe off, put the new one on, and all the etiquette of tire changing we observed. And then he got back in the car, and he pushed the start in or stepped on it, and the motor wouldn't turn over. And then he tried it again, and the motor wouldn't turn over. So he got out of the car and walked around, raised the hood, and tinkered a little. He said, everything's right here, and looked on the other side. Seems to be in good order here. So he got back in the car and stepped on the starter, and still nothing happened. And then out of the corner of my eye, because I didn't want to embarrass him by looking straight at him, his shoulders tightened, and I saw a grimness come in his face, unlike his pre-adolescent exterior. And then out of his mouth, I heard the most amazing words, vast spirals of profanity. And these were the words he had heard his father use under such circumstances. And still, the motor wouldn't turn over. So then he got out of the car and walked around behind and took the top off the gas tank, walked over to me and he said, "Mr. Thurman, do you have a pencil?" I said, "I have a pen." So I gave him my pen. He took the pen, walked back to the gas tank, put the pen down in the gas tank, held it up and said, "The tank is empty." And with that, he got on his kiddie cart, rode out into the dining room, into the kitchen, asked his mother for a glass of water, came back, drank it, and had his gas. Now, listen. A sense of self-projection, carrying with you your experience of community in the sense that I'm thinking of it. And there, entering into the ground of another human being, even as you remain yourself. The experience of community is a part of the givenness of life. It is one with the unity of life. It is one with the aliveness of life. When this experience of community becomes the formal intent, the volitional act of the individual, with the purpose of experiencing at the level of awareness what is experienced at the ground of being. Now, when a person does this, then he feels that what he is trying to do in working for a good society, what he's trying to do when he is trying to experience his own wholeness so that he will not be cloven, but will be unanimous within himself. What he is trying to do is fundamental to the intent, using intent not in a metaphysical sense, in the intent of the whole creative process. Now, if he's a religious man, and feels that there is brooding over the whole process of life a creator who wills the wholeness of his creation, then all the gross is net. The experience of community must move up, up, and up, and up until it becomes the intent of the individual. There is a sense then of wholeness at the core of man that must abound in all he does, that marks with reverence his every step, that has its sway when all else fails, that wearies out all evil things, that warms the depth of frozen fears, making friend of foe, making love of hate, and lasts beyond the living and the dead, beyond the goals of peace and the ends of war. This man seeks through all his years to be complete and of one peace within, without. There is a quiet feeling of gratitude, our Father, for the moment of presence that visits us despite our weakness, our failure, we rejoice that in this experience our hearts live even as our bodies live in the oneness of ourselves with all created things. And therefore, I will fly in the greatness of God as the marsh hen flies, filling all the space twixt the marsh and the skies by so many roots as the marsh grass sends in the sod. Behold, I will lay me a hold on the greatness of God.
It is my tab. Let me pick it up.
And that's why men flee from freedom many times. When I lived in San Francisco, one summer, Mrs. Thurman was going to one of these ladies' conferences down in Guatemala. And the day before she left, was scheduled to leave, the lady who lived with her mother in Arkansas, her mother was very elderly, dropped dead. And a wire came announcing this, and it meant that someone had to go down there to do what was necessary. And we had a house meeting on this, and it was discussed up and down, and the house meeting agreed that Mrs. Thurman should not give up her trip, but should leave on schedule the next morning. And I could not go because I had responsibilities in connection with the church and other things. And this left our two daughters. One was 10, the other was 16, 15, something like that. So the older daughter said, well, Ann and I will go down and hold the thing together until Mother gets back. And Ann jumped up from the table and ran upstairs, and I heard her door slam with that particular quality. And then after a respectful time, I went up, and I heard her in there sobbing, and I walked in and sat down on her bed, and I said, "Can you hear me?" I said, "Don't say anything, just nod your head." So she nodded. I said, I've come up not to tell you to stop crying, but I've come up to explain to you why you're crying. You're not crying because you do not want to go to Arkansas with your sister. You're not crying because it means you'll give up all the good times you're going to have in San Francisco, and that's the place where you can enjoy yourself. No, you aren't crying for these things, even though it seems as if you're crying for these reasons. But you're crying because, for the first time in your life, the family is asking you, demanding of you, that you carry your end of the stick. And you know that when you get on the train tomorrow in response to this kind of responsibility, one whole area of your life is gone forever. You will never be again as you were before. Your moment of that kind of innocence is gone. And the responsibility for this brings the tears to your eyes. Now, you can work this out in your own way, because I want to take the next last few minutes on the other dimension of responsibility. And that is responsibility, and this is more critical, I think, responsibility for your reactions. And this is where things bite. It is true that we are surrounded in our world by vast impersonal, social and economic forces, natural forces, over which we are able to exercise any positive control again and again. So the Master says, God causes his sun to shine on the good man and the bad man. If I've just killed a man and it's raining, the rain won't skip my yard because I'm a murderer. That so much of our energy and time are spent in trying to protect ourselves, on the one hand, from the impersonal operation of the world of nature, by building protection against the weather, by doing things that will enable us to control our environment wherever we are and stabilize the things that we need to guarantee our physical existence. This is a part of man's struggle, isn't it? To protect himself, to personalize the impersonal dimensions of the external world. And the same thing is true with reference to the society and to the economic forces by which you're surrounded. They don't know anything about your qualities. If you bought a pound of sugar today for whatever it sells for, 10 cents or whatever, and tomorrow, because of something that happened 5,000 miles away, you have to pay 13 cents for the sugar. Now, in the interval, you may have been as good as you knew how, as kind to all your neighbors, as generous in your spirit, as devout and holy, but that has nothing to do with it. If you get a pound of sugar, you pay 3 cents more for it. We are always victims in this sense of the word. So that if, standing in my place, I am trying to control the impersonal, social, and economic and natural forces that impinge upon my life and shape and mold and operate upon me, then I am doomed not merely to disenchantment, but I'm doomed to disaster. So what can I do if I must be free? Bearing in mind the definition of freedom, I must accept the responsibility, if I'm to be a free man, of deciding how I will react to these things? Will I say yes or no? In Oedipus Rex, you remember? After his fate had fulfilled itself, carrying out the edict of